Al Pacino has spent more than 5 decades becoming one of the most recognizable actors in American cinema, but even a career as enormous as his was never built alone. Behind Michael Corleone, Tony Montana, Frank Serpico, and all the other characters that turned Pacino into a legend were people who challenged him, inspired him, worked beside him, loved him, and in some cases changed the direction of his life completely. Some of those relationships lasted decades. One ended with a friendship that survived a real-life romance. Another became one of the most famous acting partnerships in movie history. One of these actors died tragically young after appearing in only a handful of films, while another eventually became one of Pacino's most respected professional rivals. And one of the most fascinating connections began with a woman Pacino met while making a movie that nearly destroyed his career before it even started. These are 5 people who left a lasting mark on Al Pacino, and the deeper you look into their stories, the harder it becomes to separate the actor from the people who helped shape him. The first is Robert De Niro. Today, saying the names Al Pacino and Robert De Niro together almost feels automatic. They are 2 of the defining actors of their generation, but their relationship did not begin with the legendary diner scene in Heat, because they had already been connected for years. De Niro appeared in The Godfather Part 2 as the young Vito Corleone, while Pacino played Vito's adult son Michael. The 2 characters never actually met on screen in that film, but the careers of the 2 actors were already moving in parallel. Pacino had exploded onto the scene with The Godfather in 1972. De Niro followed with Mean Streets the next year, and both became central figures in the new generation of American actors. By the 1970s, Pacino recalled that he, De Niro and Dustin Hoffman were sometimes viewed as a group of young New York actors who had made it in Hollywood. But what makes Pacino and De Niro different from ordinary industry rivals is what happened after the competition disappeared. They developed genuine affection and trust for one another. When they finally shared substantial screen time in Heat in 1995, the anticipation had become enormous. Pacino later explained that he had known De Niro for so long that working with him felt almost like playing with a relative. He described a mutual trust that helped their performances feel natural even though they had not rehearsed together in the traditional sense. Decades later, that relationship remained intact. In interviews surrounding The Irishman, Pacino described himself and De Niro as very close, even though they did not see each other constantly. He said they had helped each other throughout their lives. That is what makes their relationship so interesting. They were never simply 2 actors competing for the same crown. They were 2 men who understood exactly how difficult the other person's journey had been. The second person is Dustin Hoffman, and this relationship was built around something different: competition, admiration, and the strange pressure of being compared to another actor your entire career. Pacino and Hoffman emerged around the same period, and Hollywood frequently placed them in the same conversation. Both were associated with intense, naturalistic acting. Both came out of the New York theater world in different ways. Both became major stars without fitting the traditional Hollywood image of what a leading man was supposed to look like. Pacino wrote about this period in his memoir Sonny Boy, explaining that during the 1970s he, Hoffman and De Niro were often viewed as almost interchangeable members of a new generation of New York actors. But Pacino never really bought into the idea that he and Hoffman were equals in some professional competition. In fact, his admiration for Hoffman was enormous. Pacino has spoken about loving Hoffman in The Graduate and Midnight Cowboy, and in his memoir he recalled a bizarre moment when a producer suggested that the 2 actors settle their supposed rivalry through a boxing match. Pacino rejected the idea, joking that Hoffman would knock him out. That story says a lot about their relationship. The industry may have wanted a rivalry, but Pacino seemed far more interested in respecting the talent of the man he was constantly being compared with. They eventually worked together in Dick Tracy, but their influence on one another was much larger than the number of movies they shared. They represented a generation of performers who changed what audiences expected from American actors. They did not need to behave like traditional movie stars. Their power came from disappearing into people who felt complicated, damaged, and real. The third person is John Cazale, and this may be the most heartbreaking relationship in the entire story. Cazale played Fredo Corleone, Michael's older brother, in The Godfather and The Godfather Part 2. On paper, Fredo could have been just another supporting character. Instead, Cazale turned him into one of the most painfully human figures in the entire trilogy. Pacino and Cazale had already developed a friendship through the New York theater scene before The Godfather made them internationally famous. Their connection mattered because the two actors understood each other's approach to performance. Cazale did not perform Fredo as a simple villain or weakling. He played him as a man desperate for respect, affection, and recognition from the people around him. That made the eventual betrayal between Fredo and Michael devastating. For Pacino, the relationship with Cazale was not limited to the Corleone family. They became close friends, and Cazale became one of the most respected actors among his peers despite having an incredibly short film career. He appeared in only 5 films, and all 5 were nominated for Best Picture. His films included The Godfather, The Conversation, The Godfather Part 2, Dog Day Afternoon, and The Deer Hunter. His career ended tragically when he died from lung cancer in 1978 at only 42. Pacino was among the people who remained close to Cazale during his illness. The two had created something extraordinary together, but Cazale never lived long enough to see how permanently his performances would be remembered. His influence on Pacino is difficult to measure with statistics because their connection was personal as much as professional. Cazale represented the kind of actor Pacino came from, the kind of performer who cared more about the truth of a character than about becoming famous. And when you watch Michael and Fredo together, knowing how close the actors were in real life, some of those scenes become even more painful. The fourth person is Diane Keaton, and this relationship changed both Pacino's professional and personal life. Keaton first met Pacino while they were making The Godfather in the early 1970s. She played Kay Adams, the woman who becomes Michael Corleone's wife, and Pacino has spoken warmly about how Francis Ford Coppola paired them during the screen testing process. Pacino recalled meeting Keaton in New York before the screen test and immediately feeling that she was easy to talk to and funny. He described her as a friend and ally almost immediately. Their professional chemistry eventually became one of the defining relationships of the Godfather trilogy. But their connection went beyond the screen. Pacino and Keaton became romantically involved, and their relationship continued on and off for years. Keaton later spoke openly about being attracted to Pacino and described him as charming, funny, and fascinating. Their relationship eventually ended, but the affection between them did not simply disappear. Keaton died in October 2025 at the age of 79, and Pacino responded with an emotional tribute describing her as his partner, friend, and someone who had influenced the direction of his life more than once. He said the memories of her remained vivid and praised her as an extraordinary artist. There is another remarkable part of their story. During one difficult period in Pacino's career, when he had stepped away from major movie roles and was struggling financially, Keaton encouraged him to return to work. Pacino later recalled that Keaton found the script for Sea of Love and told him it was the right picture for him. He eventually accepted the role. So Keaton was not simply the woman who played Kay Corleone opposite him. At different moments, she was his co-star, partner, friend, and someone who pushed him back toward his career when he was drifting away from it. That makes their story much more meaningful than the usual Hollywood romance narrative. The fifth person is Michelle Pfeiffer, and her connection to Pacino shows another side of his career, the ability of a great co-star to challenge an already established actor. Pfeiffer worked with Pacino in Scarface, where she played Elvira Hancock opposite his Tony Montana. The film became one of Pacino's most famous performances, but it was not initially the universally accepted classic it later became. When it was released in 1983, Scarface divided critics and audiences. Over time, however, the movie became a cultural phenomenon, and Pfeiffer's performance became inseparable from its identity. Her Elvira was not simply Tony's glamorous girlfriend. She was one of the few people in his world who could see the emptiness underneath his ambition. That tension gave Pacino something to play against. Their scenes worked because Tony's enormous personality was constantly crashing into Elvira's exhaustion and detachment. Years later, Pacino and Pfeiffer would reunite in Frankie and Johnny, showing that their professional relationship could exist outside the explosive world of Scarface. What makes Pfeiffer important to this story is that she represents the co-stars who gave Pacino something to react against. Pacino's performances can be enormous, loud, and unpredictable, but his best scenes often become more powerful when the actor opposite him refuses to be overwhelmed. Pfeiffer had that quality. She could stand in front of Tony Montana without becoming another person swallowed by his world, and there is something connecting all five of these people. None of them created Al Pacino alone. There was no single person who magically turned him into the actor the world knows today. Pacino's foundation was built long before Hollywood made him famous. His years in New York theater, his training, his work with acting teachers, his friendships, and his own relentless commitment to the craft all mattered. But these five relationships reveal different parts of the man behind the legend. De Niro represented trust and a rare friendship between two actors who understood each other's world. Hoffman represented admiration in the middle of a supposed rivalry. Cazale represented friendship, artistic honesty, and one of the most painful losses of Pacino's life. Keaton represented love, companionship, and someone who could influence the direction of his career. And Pfeiffer represented the power of a great co-star to make an already legendary performer even more compelling. That may be the real secret behind Al Pacino's career. He was never acting in isolation. Even when he played the most intimidating characters in American cinema, his performances depended on the people standing across from him. Michael Corleone needed Kay. Tony Montana needed Elvira. Fredo needed Michael. Pacino needed De Niro's trust, Cazale's friendship, and Keaton's influence. And perhaps that is why his greatest performances continue to feel so alive decades later. The characters were fictional, but the relationships between the actors were real. Some became friendships. Some became romances. Some ended in tragedy. And some survived for more than half a century. Al Pacino is now in his 80s, but the people who shaped his journey remain visible every time one of those old films plays again. Cazale's Fredo still breaks hearts. Keaton's Kay still stands opposite Michael. De Niro's Vito remains one of the most celebrated performances in American cinema. Hoffman's influence belongs to the same generation that transformed acting. And Pfeiffer's Elvira remains permanently connected to Tony Montana's rise and collapse. Pacino's career may belong to him, but it was built through thousands of encounters with other people. Some challenged him. Some loved him. Some inspired him. Some left far too early. And that is why looking at Al Pacino's life through the people around him reveals something a simple career retrospective never could. Behind one of Hollywood's most intimidating faces was an actor who was constantly being changed by the people he allowed into his life.